I will never forget the sound of my daughter's scream as my father threw me down those concrete steps in the pouring rain. My body hit each stair with a sickening thud, pain exploding through my ribs and spine. When I finally landed at the bottom, gasping for air, he stood at the top like some twisted king on his throne, my wallet flying through the air before landing in a puddle beside me. The door slammed shut, and through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Maya sobbing inside, calling for me. That was 2 weeks ago. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I realized I had to fight back or lose my daughter forever. If you are watching this story unfold, please hit that like button and subscribe, because what I am about to share with you is how I went from sleeping in my car, beaten and broken, to completely destroying the people who tried to destroy me. Drop a comment below if you have ever felt powerless against someone who is supposed to love you. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, I have been the disappointment of the Miller family. To understand how I ended up at the bottom of those concrete steps, bleeding in the rain, you need to understand my family first. I grew up in the Miller estate on Elmwood Drive, a mansion that looked perfect from the outside. White columns, manicured hedges, cherry blossom trees in spring. Inside, crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs decorated every room. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Miller, had built an empire. He owned a real estate development company. She came from old money and sat on charity boards. Together, they were the most powerful couple in town, and they raised their children like investments. My sister Emily was 5 years older and everything they wanted: perfect grades, perfect manners, headed to Columbia Law School. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the opposite. I wanted to be an artist, not a lawyer. I asked uncomfortable questions. I daydreamed instead of studying. Every report card was a disappointment. Every parent-teacher conference was a source of shame. My teachers said I was bright and creative, but that was not the kind of intelligence my parents valued. When I was 16, I told my father I wanted to go to art school. He looked at me with cold calculation and said, "Art school is not a real education. It is where people go when they have no ambition and no real talent. You will apply to proper universities, or you will not go to college at all." My mother agreed. Emily said nothing, just looked at me with pity. That night, I decided I would leave the moment I turned 18. But 3 months before my 18th birthday, Emily died in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and killed her instantly. My parents were destroyed. My father wept at the funeral. My mother became a ghost. Emily was elevated to sainthood. Her room became a shrine. They talked about her constantly, about the brilliant lawyer she would have been. I became invisible. I was no longer just the disappointment. I was the wrong daughter to survive. I could see it in their eyes every time they looked at me. They wished it had been me instead. I moved out the week after I turned 18. My parents called me selfish and ungrateful. My mother said I was spitting on Emily's grave. But I could not stay in that house, surrounded by the ghost of a sister I could never live up to. I found a tiny studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant and enrolled in community college. I worked 3 jobs to survive: washing dishes, cleaning offices, doing data entry. It was exhausting, but it was mine. That is when I met Daniel. He was a musician, a guitar player in a local band that played at dive bars and coffee shops. He had long hair, tattoos, and a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He was everything my parents would have hated, which made him even more appealing. We met at an open mic night where I had nervously read one of my poems. He told me I had talent. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was enough. I fell for him hard and fast. We dated for 6 months. It was intense and passionate and completely reckless. I was young and desperate for someone to see me as more than a disappointment. He was charismatic and attentive, at least in the beginning. But as the months went on, cracks started to show. He was unreliable, often missing plans because he was too hungover or too focused on his music. He borrowed money from me that he never paid back. He got jealous when I talked to other guys, even if they were just classmates or coworkers. But I overlooked all of it because he made me feel wanted. Then I got pregnant. I was 23, barely scraping by, and absolutely terrified. When I told Daniel, his reaction was immediate and brutal. He said he was not ready to be a father, that we were too young, that this would ruin both of our lives. He suggested I get an abortion. When I said I was not sure, that I needed time to think, he got angry. He accused me of trying to trap him, of ruining his dreams of making it as a musician. We fought for hours. Eventually, he left my apartment and never came back. He blocked my number, quit the band, and moved to another state. I found out later from mutual friends that he had told everyone I was crazy and had tried to baby trap him. He made me the villain in his story. I was devastated, but I was also strangely relieved. As scared as I was to be a single mother, I knew that raising a child with Daniel would have been a disaster. I made the decision to keep the baby. I did not know how I was going to manage, but I knew I wanted to try. I thought about not telling my parents at all, but I also knew they would find out eventually. Our town was small enough that news traveled fast, so I called my mother. It had been almost 5 years since I moved out, and we had barely spoken. The conversation was stilted and awkward. When I finally told her I was pregnant, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then she said, in a voice colder than I had ever heard, "You have always been a disappointment, Sarah, but this is a new low. You are going to ruin what little reputation this family has left." I hung up before she could say anything else. I did not expect to hear from them again. But 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment. He did not come alone. He brought my mother, and they both looked at my tiny, shabby living space with thinly veiled disgust. My father got straight to the point. He said they were willing to help me, but only on their terms. They would pay for my medical expenses and provide financial support, but I had to agree to certain conditions. I had to keep the baby. Abortion was out of the question, because they could not risk anyone finding out and judging them for it. I had to let them be involved in the child's life. And I had to, eventually, move back home. If I could not support the child on my own, I was desperate. I had no savings, my jobs barely covered rent, and I had no idea how I was going to afford diapers and formula and everything a baby needed. So I agreed. At the time, I told myself it was a reasonable compromise. They were offering help, and I needed it. I did not see the trap they were setting. Maya was born on a cold February morning. She was small and perfect, with a head full of dark hair and eyes that looked up at me like I was the most important person in the universe. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so overwhelming it was almost painful. I promised her, right there in the hospital, that I would do everything in my power to give her a good life. I promised her I would be a better parent than mine had been. My parents showed up at the hospital with extravagant gifts. A designer diaper bag, an expensive stroller, a bassinet that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. They cooed over Maya, took pictures, and talked about how beautiful she was. For a brief moment, I thought maybe things would be different. Maybe becoming grandparents would soften them. Maybe they would finally see me as someone worthy of their love and respect. I was so wrong. The first few months of Maya's life were chaos. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified I was doing everything wrong. My parents offered to help with childcare, and I accepted because I had no other options. My mother would come over several times a week to watch Maya while I worked. At first, it seemed like a blessing. But slowly, insidiously, she started inserting herself more and more into my life. She would criticize the way I dressed Maya, saying the clothes I bought were cheap and tacky. She would criticize the formula I used, saying she had read studies that proved it was inferior. She would criticize the way I held Maya, fed Maya, played with Maya. Nothing I did was ever right. And when Maya was around 6 months old, my mother started suggesting that maybe it would be better if Maya stayed at their house during the week. She said I looked tired, that I was clearly struggling, and that Maya would be better off in a stable, comfortable environment. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor. I resisted at first. I told her I was managing fine, that I wanted Maya with me. But the truth was, I was drowning. I was working 50 hours a week across 3 different jobs just to keep my head above water. I was behind on rent. I had maxed out my credit cards. I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep a night and instant ramen. When my mother offered, again, to take Maya during the week, promising I could see her every evening and have her on weekends, I caved. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That was the beginning of the end. Once Maya started staying at their house regularly, my parents began making decisions without consulting me. They enrolled her in an expensive daycare that they paid for, one that fit their schedule, not mine. They bought her a whole new wardrobe and kept it at their house, saying it was easier than transporting clothes back and forth. They started calling themselves Mama Eleanor and Papa Richard to Maya, blurring the lines of who her real parents were. When I objected, my mother would say I was being ungrateful, that they were only trying to help, and that if I did not like it, I could figure out childcare on my own. But I could not afford childcare on my own. They knew that. By the time Maya was 2, I felt like a visitor in my own daughter's life. I would come to my parents' house for dinner, and Maya would run to my mother instead of me. I would try to put Maya to bed, and she would cry for my father. My parents would exchange knowing looks, as if to say, "See, she barely even recognizes you as her mother." It was psychological warfare, and it was working. I tried to fight back. I found a better job, one that paid a little more and had more stable hours. I moved to a slightly bigger apartment, one with an actual bedroom for Maya. I told my parents I was ready to have Maya full-time again. My mother smiled, that cold, tight smile she had perfected over the years, and said, "Are you sure you are ready for that kind of responsibility, Sarah? You have always been so flaky. We would hate for Maya to suffer because of your poor planning." I insisted. I said I was her mother, and I wanted her home with me. That is when my father stepped in. He sat me down in his study, the same room where Emily's trophies still lined the shelves, and he laid it out for me. He said they had been supporting me financially for over 2 years. They had paid for my medical bills, bought all of Maya's necessities, covered daycare, and given me money when I came up short on rent. He said I owed them, and the way I could repay that debt was by letting them continue to be an active part of Maya's life. He said if I tried to cut them off, he would take me to court and prove that I was an unfit mother who could not provide a stable home. He said he had documentation of every penny they had given me, and he would use it to show that I was financially dependent on them and incapable of caring for Maya on my own. I was shocked. I had not realized he was keeping score, building a case against me, but of course he was. That was how my father operated. Everything was a transaction. Everything was leverage. I left his study feeling defeated, but I also felt a growing sense of anger. I was trapped, and they knew it, but I told myself I could outlast them. I would keep working, keep saving, and eventually I would be financially stable enough to break free. Then, 6 months ago, everything fell apart. The diner where I worked my main job was sold to new owners. They brought in their own staff, and I was let go with 2 weeks' notice. I panicked. I applied to every job I could find, but the job market was brutal. I was overqualified for minimum wage positions and underqualified for anything that paid a living wage. My savings, what little I had, evaporated. I fell behind on rent. I started getting eviction notices. I had no choice. I went to my parents and asked for a loan. I promised I would pay them back as soon as I found work. I expected my father to lecture me, to make me grovel. What I did not expect was for him to present me with legal documents. He said he would help me, but I had to sign papers that would give them temporary legal guardianship of Maya. He said it was just a formality, protection for them in case something happened to me. He said it would only be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. I should have read those documents more carefully. I should have taken them to a lawyer, but I was desperate, and I was scared. I was on the verge of being homeless, and the thought of Maya being taken by Child Protective Services was unbearable, so I signed. I signed away my rights to my daughter because I was too broke and too frightened to see the trap closing around me. Within a week, my parents made their move. They went to court with their lawyer, a man named Harrison, who had successfully defended several high-profile clients in our town. They presented evidence that I was an unfit mother. They had documents showing my unstable employment history, my mounting debt, my eviction notices. They had character witnesses, friends of theirs who testified that they were concerned about Maya's welfare. They painted a picture of me as an irresponsible, unstable woman who could not provide for her child. And because I had signed that guardianship agreement, I had no legal standing to fight them. The judge, a man my father played golf with at the country club, granted them temporary custody. I was allowed supervised visits once a week, and even those visits were at their discretion. They moved Maya into their house permanently, converting one of the guest rooms into a bedroom fit for a princess. Pink walls, a canopy bed, more toys than any 4-year-old could ever play with. They were erasing me, replacing me with a version of motherhood that fit their image. The first time I went to visit Maya under the new arrangement, my mother answered the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She led me to the living room where Maya was playing with a dollhouse that was almost as tall as she was. When Maya saw me, she looked confused, like she was not sure who I was. My mother had been telling her I was busy with work, that I did not have time to see her. My 4-year-old daughter was being told that her mother had abandoned her. I tried to hug her, but she squirmed away and ran back to her dollhouse. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with satisfaction. She said, "You can stay for an hour. Do not upset her." I spent that hour sitting on the floor, trying to engage with a daughter who barely acknowledged me. When it was time to leave, Maya did not even say goodbye. I left that house and sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying so hard I thought I might throw up. But I could not afford to fall apart. I had to find a way to fix this. I called every legal aid office in the county, but they all told me the same thing. Fighting a custody battle against people with money and connections would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Without a lawyer, I had almost no chance of winning. I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. For 2 weeks, I was not allowed to see Maya at all. My mother claimed Maya was adjusting to her new routine and that my visits were disruptive. I called every single day, begging to speak to my daughter, and every single day I was told no. I drove by their house at night, just to see the lights on in Maya's window, just to feel close to her. I was losing my mind. That is when I made the decision that would change everything. I was not going to let them steal my daughter. I was not going to let them win. I drove to their house on that rainy Thursday evening, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I parked down the street and walked up to their perfect house with its perfect lawn and its perfect facade. I looked through the window and saw Maya sitting alone in that massive living room, playing with a doll. She looked so small, so lonely. My heart shattered all over again. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the door, and the look on her face was pure contempt. Before I could even speak, she said, "You are not supposed to be here." I begged. I told her I just wanted to see Maya for 5 minutes, just to hug her, just to let her know I loved her. My mother started to close the door, but I heard my father's voice behind her. He pushed past my mother, and his face was red with rage. He said, "You have violated the custody agreement. You are not allowed to show up unannounced. Get off my property." I tried to explain that I was her mother, that I had rights, but he cut me off. He said, "You have no rights. You signed them away. You are nothing." Something in me snapped. I pushed past both of them and ran into the house. I could hear them shouting behind me, but I did not care. I ran into the living room and grabbed Maya. She looked up at me with wide eyes and then threw her arms around my neck. She said, "Mommy," in that sweet, high-pitched voice, and for one perfect moment, everything was right in the world. Then, my father's hand clamped down on my arm. His grip was painful, bruising. He yanked me away from Maya so hard that I stumbled. He was yelling, but I could not make out the words. All I could hear was Maya crying. My mother grabbed Maya and pulled her away, and I reached for my daughter, but my father dragged me toward the door. I was fighting him, clawing at his hands, screaming at him to let me go, but he was stronger than me. He pulled me onto the porch, and then he threw me. I flew through the air and hit the concrete steps. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I tumbled down, my body hitting each step with brutal force. When I finally stopped at the bottom, I could not move. Everything hurt. The rain was pouring down, soaking me, mixing with the blood from the cut on my forehead. My father stood at the top of the steps, silhouetted against the light from the open door. He said, "You are trash, Sarah. You do not deserve to have a child. You are nothing, and you will always be nothing." Then he threw my wallet, and it landed in the puddle next to me. He went inside and slammed the door. I lay there, unable to move, unable to think. I could hear Maya screaming inside the house, calling for me. But I could not get to her. I could not even stand. The rain kept falling, and the cold seeped into my bones. I do not know how long I was there before I finally managed to pull myself up. Every movement was agony. My ribs felt like they were on fire. My head was pounding. I stumbled to my car and sat in the driver's seat, shaking and bleeding. I had nowhere to go. My apartment was a tiny studio with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a hot plate. I could not go to a hospital because I had no insurance and no money. So I called the only person I had left, Jessica. She had been my coworker at the diner, and we had become friends through shared struggles. She was a single mom too, working 2 jobs to support her son. When she answered and heard me crying, she did not ask questions. She just said, "Where are you?" She found me 20 minutes later, still sitting in my car, blood dripping down my face. She took one look at me and said, "Oh my God, Sarah." She helped me into her car and drove me to her apartment. It was small and cluttered, but it was warm. She sat me down at her kitchen table and cleaned my wounds with a gentleness that made me start crying all over again. She bandaged the cut on my forehead and gave me ice for the bruises already forming on my ribs and arms. When I finally calmed down enough to talk, I told her everything. I told her about the custody battle, about the documents I had signed, about my parents' manipulation. I told her about what had just happened, about my father throwing me down the steps. Jessica listened, her face growing harder and angrier with every word. When I finished, she said, "We are calling the police. This is assault. They cannot get away with this." But I knew they could. I explained to her who my parents were, the connections they had. My father was Richard Miller, owner of Miller Development Corporation. He had built half the commercial properties in town. He donated to the Police Benevolent Fund, sat on the board of the hospital, and was a major contributor to the mayor's campaign. My mother was on the board of 3 charities and was a prominent member of the largest church in town. They were untouchable. If I went to the police, they would spin it. They would say I had attacked them, that I had tried to kidnap Maya, that I was unstable and dangerous, and people would believe them because they always believed the Millers. Jessica argued with me, but eventually she saw my point. She said, "So, what are you going to do? You cannot just let them get away with this." I did not have an answer. I felt hopeless, defeated. I spent that night on Jessica's couch, barely able to sleep because of the pain, and because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maya's face, heard her crying for me. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my father. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but part of me hoped that maybe, somehow, he was calling to apologize. I answered. His voice was cold and controlled. He said, "If you ever come near our house again, if you ever try to contact Maya without permission, I will destroy you. I will go to court and prove that you are a drug addict. I will prove that you are mentally unstable. I will prove that you are a danger to Maya, and I will make sure you never see her again. Do you understand me?" I understood. I understood that he was willing to do anything, say anything, to keep control. I hung up without responding. I sat there on Jessica's couch, staring at the phone in my hand, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear and the despair were still there, but underneath them was something harder, something colder. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage. They had taken everything from me. They had manipulated me, humiliated me, assaulted me, and stolen my child, and they thought I would just accept it. They thought I would roll over and let them win, but they were wrong. I was done being their victim. I was done playing by their rules. If I could not fight them with money or lawyers or social standing, I would fight them another way. I would use their own arrogance against them. I would let them think they had won, and then I would destroy them. I thought about everyone I had ever known who might be able to help me, and I remembered Mrs. Peterson. She had been a social worker when I was a teenager, back when my mother's discipline involved more than just words. I had never told anyone about the times my mother slapped me or locked me in my room for days, but Mrs. Peterson had noticed. A teacher had seen bruises on my arms and reported it. Mrs. Peterson had come to our house to investigate. Of course, my parents had put on a perfect performance. They denied everything, showed her my beautiful room, talked about what a difficult, dramatic child I was. Mrs. Peterson could not prove anything, so the case was closed. But before she left, she gave me her card. She told me that if I ever needed help, I should call her. I had kept that card for over 10 years, tucked away in an old wallet. I dug it out and called the number. I half expected it to be disconnected, but she answered on the 3rd ring. I told her who I was, and she remembered me immediately. I told her what was happening, and she asked me to come see her right away. Mrs. Peterson lived in a small house on the east side of town, far from the manicured lawns and designer boutiques of my parents' neighborhood. She answered the door in a cardigan and jeans, her hair completely white now, but her eyes still sharp and kind. She invited me in, made me tea, and listened to my entire story. She asked detailed questions, took notes, and examined my bruises. When I finished, she sat back and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Sarah, I am going to be honest with you. Fighting your parents in court right now, without evidence, without money, is a losing battle. They have stacked the deck against you. But there is another way." She explained that people like my parents, people who believed they were untouchable, always made mistakes. They got comfortable. They said and did things they would never say or do if they thought anyone was watching. She said, "You need to document everything. You need to record them. Let them show you who they really are, and then we bring that evidence to the right people." She gave me 2 names. The first was Judge Patricia Walsh, a family court judge who had a reputation for being incorruptible and for prioritizing children's welfare above all political and social considerations. She had ruled against powerful families before, and she had no patience for people who used their wealth to manipulate the system. The second name was David Chen, a lawyer who worked for a legal aid organization that took on cases pro bono. Mrs. Peterson knew him personally and said he was brilliant and tenacious. But she warned me that I needed solid, undeniable evidence. Voice recordings, video if possible, medical documentation of injuries, anything that could prove what my parents were really like. Hearsay would not be enough. I needed to make them incriminate themselves. That afternoon, Jessica and I went to an electronics store. We bought a small pen that could record audio for up to 8 hours. It looked like a regular pen, but it had a tiny microphone built in. It cost $40 we could barely afford, but it was an investment in my future, in Maya's future. We also bought a small burner phone with a recording app, just as backup. Then I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I called my mother. I put on the performance of a lifetime. I cried. I apologized for showing up unannounced. I told her I had been out of line, that I understood they were just trying to help. I said I had nowhere else to go, no money, no job, no friends besides Jessica. I told her I was desperate and that I would do anything, anything at all, if they would just let me be near Maya. I swallowed my pride, my anger, my dignity, and I begged. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear my mother breathing, could picture her standing in her pristine kitchen, weighing her options. Finally, she said, "Fine. You can come back, but you will follow our rules. You will help around the house. You will be respectful and grateful. You will not make scenes. You will not question how we raise Maya. If you step out of line even once, you are out. Do you understand?" I said yes. I said I understood. I said thank you. Every word tasted like poison, but I said them. My mother told me I could move into the third-floor storage room. It used to be the attic before they converted it into a small bedroom. She said I could start the next day. I thanked her again and hung up. Then I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Jessica found me there, shaking and crying, and she held me while I broke down. She said, "Are you sure about this? Going back into that house?" I told her I did not have a choice. If I wanted to save Maya, I had to go back. I had to play the long game. I had to let them think they had broken me, and while they were busy gloating, I would gather the evidence I needed to take them down. The next day, I moved back into the house where I grew up. My mother showed me to my room on the third floor. It was small and sparse, with a single bed, a dresser that looked like it came from a garage sale, and one tiny window that looked out over the backyard. It was nothing like my old childhood bedroom, which was now Maya's room, decorated in pink and white with a canopy bed and more toys than any child could ever need. My mother handed me a handwritten list of chores: cook breakfast, clean the kitchen, do the laundry, vacuum the living room and dining room, dust all the furniture, tend the garden, prepare dinner, clean up after dinner. The list went on and on. She said, "If you want to stay here, you will earn your keep. And maybe, if you prove yourself, we will allow you more time with Maya." I took the list and said, "Yes, ma'am." She looked at me with something like satisfaction, turned, and walked away. As soon as she was gone, I pulled out the recording pen and put it in the pocket of my jeans. From that moment on, I would record everything. The first few days were a test. My parents watched me like hawks, waiting for me to mess up, to complain, to show any sign of defiance. But I gave them nothing. I woke up at 6 in the morning, made them a gourmet breakfast, cleaned every surface until it gleamed, did their laundry, and cooked elaborate dinners. I played the part of the perfect servant. And all the while, that pen in my pocket was recording. Maya did not understand why I was there. She would see me in the kitchen, cooking or cleaning, and she would look confused. My mother told her I was there to help Grandma and Grandpa, that I was learning to be more responsible. She said it in a way that made it sound like I was a child being punished, not a grown woman and Maya's mother. Maya started treating me like I was part of the household staff, polite but distant. 3 days after I moved in, we had dinner together. My father, my mother, Maya, and me. I served the food I had spent hours preparing and then sat down at my place at the far end of the table, the seat furthest from Maya. My father started talking about his business, about some deal he was closing. Then he turned his attention to me. He said, "You know, Sarah, your sister Emily would have been a partner at a law firm by now. She would have made us proud. But you ended up slinging hash at a diner. How embarrassing." My mother chimed in. "It is shameful, really. We gave you every advantage and you squandered it. At least Maya has a chance to be raised properly now. We will make sure she does not turn out like you." The pen in my pocket was recording every word. I kept my eyes down, my hands folded in my lap, and I said nothing. My father seemed disappointed that I did not react. He wanted me to fight back so he could have an excuse to punish me, but I would not give him that satisfaction. After dinner, Maya was playing in the living room. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard a crash. I ran into the living room to find that Maya had knocked over a glass of water. It had spilled onto the side table, soaking a framed photograph of Emily. My mother, who had been reading in the corner, stood up so fast her book fell to the floor. She grabbed Maya by the arm and spun her around. Then she slapped her. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and brutal. Maya fell to the floor, crying, her hand pressed to her red cheek. My mother stood over her, shaking with rage. She said, "You clumsy, stupid child, just like your mother, all you do is ruin beautiful things. You are a disappointment." I ran toward Maya, but my father appeared out of nowhere and blocked me. He shoved me hard against the wall, and my head cracked against the corner of a picture frame. Stars exploded in my vision. He said, "Stay out of this. This is discipline. Maybe if someone had disciplined you properly, you would not be such a failure." I slid down the wall, dazed, while Maya sobbed on the floor and my mother stood over her, still shaking with fury. The pen in my pocket recorded everything: the slap, Maya's cries, my father shoving me, my mother's venomous words. Later that night, alone in my tiny room, I listened to the recording and cried. But I also felt something else: hope, because now I had proof. Now I had evidence that could not be denied. The next day, I hid the recording pen under a couch cushion in the living room. My mother often took Maya in there for what she called special time with Grandma. I retrieved the pen that evening while everyone was at dinner. Later, in my room, I listened to the recording. My mother's voice was sweet and gentle, so different from her usual cold tone. She said, "Maya, sweetheart, do you know why your mommy is here?" Maya's small voice answered, "To help you and Grandpa?" My mother said, "That is part of it, darling. But the real reason is because she has nowhere else to go. She does not have any money. She does not have any friends. She only came back because she needs us. Do you understand?" Maya did not answer. My mother continued, "Your mommy does not really love you the way Grandma and Grandpa do. If she loved you, she would never have left. She would have fought harder to stay with you, but she did not. She gave up. We are the ones who love you. We are the ones who will always be here for you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run downstairs and confront her, to tell Maya the truth, to expose my mother for the manipulative monster she was. But I could not. Not yet. I had to wait. I had to gather more evidence. I had to build an airtight case. Over the next week, I recorded more conversations. My father talking about how I was a burden, how I had always been the wrong daughter to survive. My mother complaining to her friends on the phone about how she was stuck raising her grandchild because her daughter was too incompetent. Snippets of them discussing their plans to legally adopt Maya and cut me out completely. But the most damning recording came almost 2 weeks after I moved back in. I was dusting the hallway outside my father's study when I heard him on the phone. He did not know I was there. He was talking to his lawyer, Harrison. He said, "I want you to start the paperwork for relocating to North Carolina. My brother has a place down there, and the laws are more favorable. Once we move Maya out of state, Sarah will have no legal recourse. We can file for permanent adoption, and she will never see that kid again." Harrison said something I could not hear, and then my father said, "I do not care what it costs. I want this done quietly and quickly. That girl is a stain on this family, and I want her erased from Maya's life completely." I stood frozen in the hallway, the recording pen hidden in my apron pocket, capturing every word. They were planning to take Maya away forever, to a place where I could not follow. I had maybe a week, 2 at most, before they executed this plan. I could not wait any longer. That night, I called Jessica from my burner phone. I told her what I had heard. She said, "You need to get out of there. Now. Take Maya and run." I told her I could not just run. If I took Maya without a legal reason, I would be guilty of kidnapping. They would use that against me, and I would lose her forever. But I also could not stay. I had enough evidence. I had recordings of emotional abuse, physical abuse, and their plans to permanently separate me from my daughter. It was time to act. Jessica and I came up with a plan. She would park down the street from my parents' house at 2 in the morning. I would get Maya, and we would leave. Then, we would immediately go to Mrs. Peterson, who would help us contact David Chen and file emergency motions with Judge Walsh. It was risky, but it was the only option we had. At 1:45 in the morning, I lay in my bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. At 2 o'clock, I crept out of my room and down the stairs. The house was silent except for the ticking of that old grandfather clock in the hallway. I made it to the second floor where Maya's room was. I opened her door as quietly as I could. She was asleep in her canopy bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and expensive toys she had never asked for. I knelt beside her bed and gently shook her awake. She opened her eyes, confused and scared. I put my finger to my lips and whispered, "It is okay, baby. Mommy is here. We are going on an adventure, but you have to be very, very quiet. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, still half asleep. I grabbed a small backpack and shoved some of her clothes into it. Then I picked her up and held her close. We made it down the stairs. The front door was just ahead. Freedom was just ahead. But as we crossed the living room, one of the floorboards creaked. It was a tiny sound, but in the dead silence of the night, it was like a bomb going off. Upstairs, I heard my father's bedroom door slam open. I heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway. I did not think. I just ran. I threw open the front door and sprinted across the lawn. Maya was crying now, clinging to my neck, asking what was happening. Behind me, I heard my father shouting my name. I heard my mother's voice too, shrill and angry. I ran down the driveway and onto the street. Jessica's car was parked 3 houses down, engine running. I could see her in the driver's seat, waving frantically. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like they were going to give out. But I kept going. I reached the car and yanked open the back door. I threw the backpack inside, then climbed in with Maya still in my arms. Jessica hit the gas before I even had the door closed. The car lurched forward, and I looked back. My father was standing in the middle of the street in his bathrobe, his face twisted with rage, shouting something I could not hear. My mother was running after us, but she was too slow. We turned the corner, and they disappeared from view. Jessica drove fast, taking random turns, making sure we were not being followed. Maya was crying, asking why we had to leave, why Grandpa and Grandma were so angry. I held her tight and told her everything was going to be okay, that Mommy was going to keep her safe. I did not know if I was lying. We drove to the motel on the outskirts of town, the same one Jessica had taken me to before. She paid for a room in cash, and the 3 of us crammed inside. It was a tiny, shabby room with stained carpet and a bathroom that smelled like mold. But it was ours, and we were safe. For now. Jessica turned on the TV and found a cartoon for Maya, trying to distract her. Maya sat on the bed, still crying softly, clutching the stuffed rabbit I had managed to grab from her room. I stepped outside with my phone and called Mrs. Peterson. It was 2:30 in the morning, but she answered immediately. I told her what I had done, and she said, "Good, now we fight." She told me to stay where I was and that she would contact David Chen first thing in the morning. She warned me that my parents would almost certainly call the police and report Maya as kidnapped. She said, "Do not leave that motel. Do not answer calls from unknown numbers. And whatever you do, do not panic. We have the evidence. We are going to win." I went back inside the room. Jessica was sitting on the bed with Maya, who had finally stopped crying and was watching the cartoon with glazed eyes. I sat down next to them, and the 3 of us stayed like that until the sun came up. At 7 in the morning, my phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, one after another. I did not answer. Then Jessica's phone rang. She looked at me, uncertain. I nodded, and she answered on speaker. It was a police officer. He said that Richard and Eleanor Miller had filed a report claiming that their mentally unstable daughter had kidnapped their granddaughter in the middle of the night. An Amber Alert had been issued. He asked Jessica if she knew where I was. Jessica, bless her, did not hesitate. She said, "I know exactly where she is, and she did not kidnap anyone. She is protecting her daughter from abusive grandparents. If you want to arrest her, you will have to go through a lawyer first." Then she hung up. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Did I just obstruct justice?" I almost laughed. Almost. Mrs. Peterson called at 8 o'clock. She said David Chen was on his way and that he would be at the motel within the hour. True to her word, David arrived at 9:15. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 30s, with black hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a briefcase and a laptop. He sat down at the tiny table in our motel room and said, "Okay, show me what you have." I played him the recordings, all of them, every single piece of evidence I had gathered. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each recording. When the recording of my mother slapping Maya played, he flinched. When my father's voice talked about erasing me from Maya's life, his jaw tightened. When it was all over, he sat back and said, "This is more than enough. This is child abuse, elder abuse, parental alienation, and conspiracy. We can absolutely fight this." He explained the plan. He would file an emergency motion with Judge Walsh for an immediate hearing. He would request a protective order for Maya and me, and he would petition to have my full custody rights restored. He would also provide copies of the recordings to the police to show that I was not a kidnapper, but a mother protecting her child from documented abuse. He said, "This is not going to be easy. Your parents have money and connections, but Judge Walsh does not care about money or connections. She cares about kids, and these recordings prove that Maya is not safe with them." He left the motel at 10 o'clock to file the paperwork. The rest of the day was agony. We stayed locked in that motel room, terrified that the police would show up and arrest me. Maya did not understand what was happening. She kept asking when she could go home, when she could see Grandma and Grandpa. Every time she asked, it felt like a knife in my heart. Jessica kept Maya distracted with cartoons and coloring books she had bought at a gas station. I paced the room, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except what would happen if we lost. David called at 4 in the afternoon. He said Judge Walsh had agreed to an emergency hearing. It was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. He said, "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we are going to war." I did not sleep that night. I lay in the motel bed with Maya curled up next to me, listening to her breathe, terrified that this might be the last night I had with her. Jessica sat in a chair by the window, keeping watch, making sure my parents did not show up. The hours crawled by, each one longer than the last. At 9 o'clock the next morning, we drove to the courthouse. David was waiting for us outside. He looked calm and confident, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He said, "They are already inside. They brought their lawyer, and they brought witnesses. They are going to fight hard, but so are we." We walked into the courthouse, and I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The courtroom was small and sterile, with rows of wooden benches and a judge's bench at the front. My parents were already there, sitting with their lawyer, Harrison. They looked immaculate, as always. My father in a tailored suit, my mother in a designer dress and pearls. They looked like the picture of respectability, like the kind of people who could never do anything wrong. I looked like exactly what I was. A struggling single mother who had been sleeping in a motel, wearing the same jeans and sweater I had been wearing for 2 days. My hair was a mess. I had bags under my eyes. I looked like someone who was barely holding it together, but I had something they did not. I had the truth. Judge Patricia Walsh entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She sat down, looked over the paperwork in front of her, and said, "This is an emergency hearing regarding custody of the minor child, Maya Elizabeth Miller. Let us proceed." Harrison stood up. He was smooth and polished, the kind of lawyer who made a living defending people who could afford him. He painted a picture of me as an irresponsible, mentally unstable woman. He said I had abandoned my daughter, that I had been unable to hold down a job, that I was financially destitute. He said my parents were upstanding citizens who had stepped in to care for a child whose mother could not. He brought in witnesses, friends of my parents, wealthy people from their social circle. They testified that the Millers were wonderful, generous people who only wanted what was best for their granddaughter. One woman, a friend of my mother's from church, said she had known the Millers for 20 years and that they were pillars of the community. She said, "Eleanor and Richard are the most caring, responsible people I know. That poor little girl is so lucky to have them." Another witness, a business partner of my father's, said, "Richard Miller is a man of integrity. He has always put family first." It went on, one glowing testimony after another. I sat there, listening, feeling my hope drain away. They were so convincing. They had built this perfect image of themselves, and everyone believed it. Harrison finished his presentation and sat down with a satisfied smile. He thought he had won. Then it was David's turn. He stood up, and he did not waste time with long speeches or dramatic gestures. He simply said, "Your Honor, I would like to present audio evidence that was recorded by my client while she was residing in the defendant's home. This evidence will demonstrate a clear pattern of emotional and physical abuse toward both my client and the minor child." Harrison immediately objected. He said the recordings were inadmissible, that they had been obtained without consent. David calmly explained that under state law, only one party needed to consent to a recording, and that party was Sarah. Judge Walsh overruled the objection and allowed the recordings to be played. The courtroom went silent. David played the first recording. My father's voice, dripping with contempt, calling me trash. My mother saying Maya would be raised to replace Emily and would not end up like me. The silence in the room was absolute. I could see the witnesses shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then, David played the second recording. The sound of my mother's hand striking Maya's face was sharp and brutal. Maya's sobs echoed through the courtroom. Then my father's voice, shoving me against the wall, telling me I was a failure. My mother's voice, calling Maya stupid and clumsy. I glanced at my parents. My father's face was red, his hands clenched into fists. My mother sat frozen, her perfect composure cracking. Judge Walsh's expression had gone from neutral to stone cold. David played the third recording. My mother's sweet, poisonous voice telling Maya that I did not really love her, that only Grandma and Grandpa would always be there for her. When it finished, the silence was so heavy it felt like it was crushing me. Finally, David played the recording of my father on the phone with his lawyer, discussing plans to move Maya out of state and permanently erase me from her life. When that recording ended, Judge Walsh looked at my parents with an expression I will never forget. It was disgust mixed with fury. She said, "I have heard enough. These recordings clearly demonstrate a pattern of emotional abuse, physical abuse, and parental alienation. They demonstrate that the minor child is not safe in the care of Richard and Eleanor Miller. They also demonstrate a conspiracy to permanently separate this child from her biological mother." Harrison tried to object, tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, but Judge Walsh cut him off. She said, "There is no context in which it is acceptable to slap a 4-year-old child across the face. There is no context in which it is acceptable to tell a child that her mother does not love her. There is no context in which it is acceptable to assault the child's mother in front of her." Judge Walsh ruled immediately. Full custody of Maya was restored to me. A permanent restraining order was issued against Richard and Eleanor Miller. They were not allowed to contact me or Maya in any way, shape, or form. They were not allowed to come within 500 feet of us. Judge Walsh also said she was referring the case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution for child abuse, assault, and custodial interference. My parents sat there, stunned. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look powerless. My mother's face had gone pale. Harrison was shuffling papers, trying to salvage something, but there was nothing left to salvage. Judge Walsh brought down her gavel and said, "This hearing is concluded." I could not breathe. I could not believe it. We had won. I had actually won. David put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did it." Jessica was crying. Mrs. Peterson, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, came forward and hugged me. But the best moment was when the court-appointed guardian brought Maya to me. She ran into my arms and said, "Mommy." I fell to my knees and held her so tight I thought I might break her. I whispered, "I am never letting you go again. Never." She hugged me back and said, "I love you, Mommy." I was crying so hard I could barely see. But they were tears of relief, of joy, of victory. But David had one more move to make. He had, intentionally, left copies of the recordings with a journalist friend of his at the local newspaper. 2 days after the hearing, a front-page article appeared. The headline read, "The Dark Side of the Miller Family, Abuse Behind Closed Doors." The article detailed everything. The custody battle, the recordings, the judge's ruling. It quoted some of the most damning parts of the recordings. It included photographs of my bruises from the night my father threw me down the steps. The response was immediate and devastating. My father's business began to crumble. Clients canceled contracts. Business partners distanced themselves. His reputation, built over decades, was destroyed in a matter of days. My mother's charity boards asked for her resignation. Her church friends stopped calling. The women who had testified on their behalf in court were now distancing themselves, claiming they had been deceived. Within 2 weeks, my parents went from being the most respected family in town to being pariahs. People crossed the street to avoid them. Former friends refused to take their calls. My father's business was hemorrhaging money. My mother was reduced to grocery shopping at odd hours to avoid running into people she knew. One night, about 3 weeks after the article came out, my father called me. I had blocked his number, but he called from a different phone. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. He was drunk. I could hear it in his slurred words, in the way he was breathing. He said, "You destroyed this family. You destroyed everything we built. Everyone hates us now. It is all your fault. I had spent 28 years being afraid of this man. I had spent my childhood trying to earn his approval. I had spent my adult life trying to escape his control. But in that moment, I felt nothing but pity. I said, "No, Dad. I did not destroy your family. You did. You and Mom. You abused your daughter, you abused your granddaughter, and you got caught. I did not ruin you. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see who you really are. You did this to yourselves." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, his voice breaking, "You were supposed to be grateful. We gave you everything." I almost laughed. I said, "You gave me nothing but pain and shame. But you know what? I am grateful. I am grateful that I am nothing like you. I am grateful that Maya will never know what it is like to grow up the way I did. And I am grateful that you will never hurt us again." Then I hung up. I blocked that number too. I deleted every contact I had for my parents. I erased them from my life as completely as they had tried to erase me from Maya's, and I never looked back. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, then to fall. Maya and I moved into a small but bright apartment on the other side of town. It had 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with big windows that let in the sun. For the first time in years, I woke up every morning without a knot of dread in my stomach. I found a job working as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit. It did not pay a fortune, but it was stable, and it had benefits, real benefits, like health insurance and paid time off. Maya started preschool. She made friends. She laughed. She played. She stopped asking when she could see Grandma and Grandpa. She stopped having nightmares. Slowly, carefully, she became the happy, carefree child she was supposed to be. She started calling me Mommy again without hesitation, without looking around to see if Eleanor was there to correct her. Jessica remained my closest friend. She came over for dinner at least once a week, and our kids played together. Mrs. Peterson checked in on us regularly, bringing cookies and words of encouragement. David Chen became someone I called whenever I had a legal question, and he never, ever charged me. He said helping me was one of the most satisfying cases of his career. I heard through the grapevine that my father's business eventually went bankrupt. He had to sell the house on Elmwood Drive, the house I grew up in, the house where my sister's ghost still lived in every photograph and trophy. My parents moved to a small condo in a different town, far away from the people who once admired them. I did not feel bad for them. I felt free. As Christmas approached, Maya and I decided to decorate our apartment. We went to a discount store and bought a small artificial tree, some lights, and a box of ornaments on clearance. On Christmas Eve, we stayed up late decorating. Maya was so excited, running around with ornaments in her hands, debating where each one should go. She hung mismatched bulbs and homemade paper snowflakes. She strung popcorn garland that she insisted on making herself, even though half the popcorn ended up on the floor. The final ornament was a small wooden house, painted red with a white roof. Maya held it up and said, "This one is special, Mommy. This is our house, our real house where we are safe." I hung it on the tree, right in the center where we could both see it. Then I pulled Maya into my lap, and we sat on the couch, looking at our little tree with its imperfect decorations and twinkling lights. Outside, it started to snow. Big, soft flakes drifted past the window, covering the world in white. Maya rested her head on my shoulder and said, "I am happy, Mommy. Are you happy?" I kissed the top of her head and said, "Yes, baby. I am happier than I have ever been." For the first time in my life, I was not trying to earn anyone's approval. I was not trying to be good enough for people who would never see my worth. I had fought for my daughter, for myself, and for the life we deserved. I had walked through fire, and I had come out the other side stronger. I was free. We were free. And that freedom was worth more than anything my parents' money could ever buy. Sometimes people ask me if I regret anything. They ask if I wish I had handled things differently, if I wish I could have salvaged my relationship with my parents. The answer is no. Some relationships are not meant to be saved. Some people will never change, no matter how much you sacrifice or how hard you try. The only regret I have is that I did not walk away sooner. But I also know that I was not ready to walk away until I was ready. Healing is not linear. Justice is not always swift. But it is possible. I learned that your worth is not determined by the people who are supposed to love you but choose to hurt you instead. I learned that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is survival. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. I learned that love, real love, does not manipulate or control or demean. It lifts you up. It makes you stronger. and I learned that I am stronger than I ever knew. Today, Maya and I are building a life together. We are not rich. We do not live in a mansion. We do not have designer clothes or expensive cars, but we have something my parents never had. We have peace. We have each other. We have a home filled with love and laughter and light, and that is worth more than all the money and status in the world. If you are in a situation like I was, please know this. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve to live a life free from fear and manipulation. It is not easy to walk away from toxic people, especially when they are family. But your life, your happiness, and your children's safety are worth fighting for. Document everything. Find people who believe you. Do not give up. You are stronger than you think. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect yourself or your children? How did you find the strength to do it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of survival and strength. Your support means everything. Thank you for listening to my story.